Greetings and salutations. Welcome to the Agora. We are a forum to examine the unexamined life or talk about whatever the heck we decide to throw together on the drive in. We like to call ourselves the place where we talk about all the things you want to but are afraid to. We believe that the questions of faith, ethics, morality, and society are too important to be solved through memes on Facebook or celebrity rants on Instagram. As Richard has clearly demonstrated, don't do what Richard does, and you'll just live a longer, happier life if you do the exact opposite, more often than not. The reason why we have started this forum, why this is something close to the hearts of all of us, is that we recognize we're living in a world that each day makes it easier and easier to avoid anybody who might disagree with your worldview. We live in a world where you can literally pick and choose what news you want fed into your cycle, and pick and choose exactly what friend groups you want to associate with and exactly who you want to be known with. And as a result, we're losing the ability to articulate and defend our own worldview by actually being forced to dialogue and interact with people who might disagree with us. So we believe that true tolerance is not agreeing with everybody else, but in validating their humanity, validating their dignity, and validating their humanity, and actually respecting them and honoring them in spite of disagreement. And that's why we're here. And just gets us out of the house for a couple hours on these lockdown days that we're all facing. By the way, we're hopefully going to be entering phase 2 today, but that darn seafood cannery in Newport had to go and ruin it for all of us. So you're avoiding it. There was an outbreak in Newport at a seafood cannery. I guess there's like 130 people that got sick, and there are a couple other outbreaks across the state. So they officially put a pause on all applications because Marion County was supposed to enter phase 2 of reopening today. So, but we'll have to wait another 168 hours. That aside, we have some exciting news to share as well. We are joined by our super special guest today, coming to us all the way from the fine metropolis of Monmouth. The Vegas of the Northwest, I've been told it's been called.
That's so...
Like the exact opposite?
No, you're right.
Oh, really?
I didn't know of Monmouth. I just thought there were 3 places in Oregon. Ashland, Portland, and maybe Salem.
And maybe.
I didn't know if it was actually
Capital?
here.
No.
I was like, possibly, maybe.
It's like Atlantis. Like, maybe it exists. We don't know.
There's 2 Portlands and there's 2 Salems. We just rip off everything.
Well, yeah, we take them from the East Coast. We're like, let's not try to think of a new name. It works for...
Piece is pretty good.
That is true.
I mean,
Is that what we're calling
Yeah, let's live up to our name. Anyway, we are joined by our dear sister from another Mr. Rosie here this morning. So, Rosie, why don't you share a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how it is that we sucked you into this experiment
I don't
today.
think that's how that.
I don't
No,
think that's
no,
how. I
no.
think I sucked you in.
That okay.
yeah,
Fair point. Why,
I'm pretty sure she.
I think I
Got this all.
pitched more.
That's true. For those of you who watch us in anger every week and hate and contempt for the vile, putrid things that come out of our mouths, you have this lady to actually blame for it, and she's going to explain why.
Okay. So, my name's Rosie. I'm from Monmouth. I'm a student at Western Oregon University. My job title is station manager of KWOU, which is our station.
K-woo.
No, I say KWOU like
Yeah.
like some commoner. Like I don't say like
Kwa'u?
everyone else
Yeah.
says it KWOU, and I'm like KWOU.
The W.
It does.
The W kind of throws off the flow when it's that triple syllabic or
KWOU.
trisyllabic.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
If it was
but,
like KZOU or KZOU, but the W just throws off the rhythm.
like Sega? Are you ripping off Sega?
I am.
K-woo,
Thank you,
here
Sega.
for
do that
you.
for us? Can you like
Not
do
legally,
recording?
but.
I don't think Sega will mind.
If the
I don't
fine
think they're
folks at
listening.
Sega are watching.
You know what's funny is there only some of us are old enough to remember the Sega, like K-woo, like Sega.
Hey, I had the original Atari growing up, and it was Bomb Bam Bizzle. We had
I-
epic
I
Pong
didn't even
nights.
play Sonic. I just
It's just yeah.
You know about
Anyway,
it
go ahead.
lore.
okay. So
Anyway, do your
I'm
thing.
the station manager for our radio station, and we kind of met in a weird way. It was New Student Week at the beginning of this year.
Last year, so September. Wait a minute.
Last year?
Yeah. Yes.
2019.
Quick math.
No, it was this year.
Wait, last calendar year, this school year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Last year.
Sorry. Way back in
Last fall.
2019.
Last fall.
There we go.
PC,
we were
pre-COVID.
we were doing tabling for New Student Week, And I'm sitting there, and Woo TV is yelling and doing their thing as they usually do, going like, "Join our thing," and KWU and student media is like, "We're not affiliated with them. Like, we don't know them." And I was making a joke about like the freedom of speech and how Woo TV doesn't. I don't know. I was making a comment, and Garrett just turns around and goes, "Yeah, we talk about that," and I'm like, "What?"
Can you do that again? I don't remember the. It was probably more subtle than that.
You
but-
didn't turn around like this, but you did turn
Okay,
around
okay,
and
okay.
you did kind of go, "What's going on over there?"
I believe I had an ear to the situation.
So I was like, "Oh," like out of politeness, I was like, "So what do you guys do?" And you guys were explaining, and I was like, "Oh, well, gee, I didn't know there was something like that on campus." And I kind of felt like this, like a wave of like relief that there was somebody at school who we could talk about this stuff, because my entire freshman year was me just getting shut down by a lot of professors, and a lot of people saying that the things I was saying in class weren't correct in a very subtle and very professor-like way.
Yeah.
And I started going to Agora meetings and stuff, and then I was like, "Hey guys, I have a thing of my own," and you guys were like, "Okay," and then I was like, "Do you want a show?" And then you guys said yes, and now you guys do shows. I mean, not for
We did,
yeah,
yes.
not for the last couple of weeks, but I understand why.
Lord willing, we will again in the fall, assuming we're all back on campus. But yeah, let's be praying that works out. But yeah, so that's kind of how we honed our craft here, is actually on the fine airwaves of KWOO. I can't do it any other way now.
KWOO.
And we decided to bring it to the big screen, to the fine YouTube channels.
Not where we crafted it. We've done this for years and years and years
Well,
with students
okay.
and groups.
So we crafted this
Given them a
format.
place to have a forum to
Yes.
discuss everything in life that they probably couldn't talk about in other places. And
Right.
so that's the.
So I remember what comment you made, a couple comments you made that really stuck with us, Rose. One where you said that, and you can call me out if I'm paraphrasing you too loosely on this
Sure.
one. But the idea that you learn more about how to communicate interpersonally from our group meetings than from any of your comm classes, something along those lines.
I was gonna say I can either
Neither confirm
or deny that, because the professor that did teach me interpersonal comm was very helpful. But
Okay.
let me rephrase. I
Okay.
think that you guys were a nice addition to my
Okay.
education to help me understand people a little bit more, because I don't think I was very empathetic when I first met you guys. I was very like in my own world. I was like, everyone's wrong and I'm right and stuff. So I kind of felt like you guys were open enough to help me out with that.
Yeah, and that meant a lot to hear. And then another one that really stuck with us was when we were talking about tribalism, which is a theme that we come across a lot these days. And where you mentioned that I think your words were, I'm not a Christ follower, but yet I feel a connection with you guys like I'm part of your tribe. And one of the beauties, again, of the Agora is we can have people of different worldviews, different backgrounds. We share our worldview, we share our faith convictions in a loving and respectful manner. And Rosie and I, we disagree on a lot of things, I'm sure, as far as basic worldview as well. That doesn't mean that we can't have respectful, honoring dialogue. So that was really cool for you to say that while we can disagree on some fundamental worldview issues, you feel welcome, you feel, accepted and part of what we're doing. So
it's all based on trust. Like, I think a lot of people just go, "Oh, you're part of my friend group," very easily.
Yeah.
And there's no aspect of like trust, or there's no trial to become someone's friend. It's
Exactly.
just, "Hey, you're my friend because I like the music you like." And for me, that's not how I make friends. I make friends based off of trust, and people stay my acquaintances for a long time before they can really like become my friends. And I would never think that I would be friends with someone who has a completely different religion or a completely different like view than me.
Yeah.
But what our friendship is based off is trust, that I know that my secrets and my beliefs are safe with you too, and that they're respected in that way.
There's actually a book. It's called Safe People, and it's
Great
written by
book.
a psychologist. And actually, one of the things he talks about is that the people you let into your life.
Mhm.
We all know when someone's not safe intuitively. Like if you share information and then all of a sudden they use that information to hurt you or to get you or to come after you, then they're not a safe person. And so, yeah, I think that's a key for everybody. Is like how to have healthy relationships. Is, are these people safe? Are they, if I tell them something in confidence, are they going to keep it? All that type of stuff. And so, yeah, it's good to know.
You
I
never
think
want to
that's
like wait for them to like hurt you. That's
Right.
I think that's
Yeah.
like my biggest issue is that I never know who's out there to get me. You know,
Yeah.
I think that line of ambiguity.
And isn't it weird that we even have to think like that? Like who's? But I mean, in this world of multimedia, like we can leave a comment. It's like people can just go crazy.
Or you
with
can
that.
say it, you talk for an hour and have the one thing you say it's controversial pulled out of context
Yeah.
and played for everybody or repeated to everybody.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I think kind of something we were talking about earlier was that so much of the world dehumanizes people, where we forget that we're talking to a human,
Yes.
and they have value, and they have. So anyway, yeah, we've talked a lot about this stuff
Enough of
over
this
the past
serious,
year
sentimental
and,
stuff.
and stuff, but it's been super fun to have you
It has
involved with all those discussions
Yeah.
and everything else. So.
So hopefully. Sorry, our wise, omniscient,
Is that
disembodied
better?
producer
Am I
Daniel
clear sounding
is
now?
telling us that we're not loud enough. Okay. We call Daniel the wizard because he's like the man behind the curtain. Pay no
you
attention.
I
wouldn't
like that.
call him the
I like
wizard.
that.
You'd call him just.
Do you like being called
Oz.
the wizard, Daniel?
I just like to call him Oz.
Okay,
Can I call you
alright.
Oz?
Oz.
Just my Oz? The great Oz?
I think.
You don't have a curtain, though. I
No.
can see you.
Maybe if there is we should get a curtain.
Yeah.
Sound treating, we should get like a curtain.
You
For those who
just
can't
be behind
hear
it.
Daniel, he's mentioning that we should get a sound curtain here.
Yeah.
So, well,
If
once
You're in
KW,
plain
you had
sight. You're
one,
not a
we'd
very good
definitely
Oz.
give
if
them.
anybody's listening out there and wants to sponsor a sound curtain for our show and a couple more mics and some lighting, maybe a sound cage, some buffering, all
KW
this stuff.
has tried that.
Yeah,
and we're like,
yeah.
hey guys, if you listen and you want to donate, crickets.
Hey, we're up to 11 whole subscribers as of this morning, so we're
Oh.
clearly it's a freight train from hell and nothing can stop. I like to say. All right, enough of this sentimental stuff. Let's start out. I have a couple life questions for you that pertain to literally nothing, but I'm curious to get your thoughts on. Two of them. One, it happened to me this morning and it got me thinking. So, Friday morning is trash day at our house. I don't know when your guys is, but ours is every Friday.
Every day.
Every day?
Oh yeah.
Really? Monmouth has everyday trash service?
Oh, for students, we just
Oh,
take our
okay.
trash to the bins and then
Sorry.
hope that they're
I-
gonna not be closed. 'cause
Context.
I'm
Yeah,
Context.
Context.
I'm
Gotcha,
short and I
gotcha.
can't reach the garbage cans. So I have to ask my 7-foot giant roommate to.
You have a
open
7-foot
the-
giant roommate?
He's so tall.
I want to meet him.
He's so tall. Like he's taller than you.
So I can't meet him because he's tall?
Yeah, exactly.
That's heightism. All right. But okay, so my question. So our trash can's usually full by Thursday because we have the small trash can. Say you can do the small or the large size, and we
Sure.
save like $15 a month.
Sure.
Our neighbors have an extra large size, and it's just this little old couple, wonderful neighbors, Corky and Thelma. If you guys are listening, you guys are the best ever. And they usually fill up like a third of their can. So they say, hey, once it's out, put anything you guys want in. There's room. So usually Friday I'll try to throw an extra bag in there to save space because you don't want to get to the end of the week and your can be completely full and you still have trash in there and it's got to sit around. It's no bueno. So I'm rushing this morning and I have a
Beautiful image of you, like in flip flops and like a robe with like
I-
trash bags, and you're just like flailing towards the garbage like heroically.
I did have the
See?
conversation with my wife whether it's okay to run outside to the trash in my robe because I am a robe guy. Full confession.
that's why I said that.
Robes are glorious. No, I was dressed this morning. I was in. It was right before I came because I was trying to wait till the last minute. But okay, so here's the question I'm getting to. So our bag was about half full. We have the giant like full size black trash bags in there right now because we're out of the smaller ones. So I pulled it out. It was about half full after I stuffed everything I could in there, and I'm thinking, I'm basically wasting half of a trash bag by not filling it up all the way. So, do I hold off in order to maximize the money I spent on those trash bags in that space, or do I throw it in now to get rid of that extra garbage and not let it accumulate throughout the week? And I ended up just tossing it. But this got me thinking about the things in life that we will do every single time to save just a few cents, and then the things where we're glad and could easily save the money, but just out of convenience sake, we say, nah, screw it.
I feel like this
I'll
needs
pay
to
the
be
money.
like Deep Thoughts with Garrett. You know, like if you ever watched Saturday Night Live, like
Oh.
Deep Thoughts with Jack
Jack Handy,
Handy.
yes.
Yeah, like meaningful, deep thoughts. So please continue on. So the cents I'm saving throughout the week,
Well,
throwing the
just-
garbage in there.
It got me thinking about that. The things that I will go to out of my way to try to save a few cents on, and the things where I will gladly pay the extra few cents out of convenience. So another one is wipes, baby wipes. We have 2 little kids at home, and so we have to have baby wipes on hand. But I got to the point where I would start using them to clean the kitchen. Now I could save money by just wetting a paper towel down or using a reusable towel and wiping it down. But the convenience of just being able to wipe as much as you want and toss it away is nice, even though I realize it's costing me more pennies. So that's one that I'll gladly pay for. But on the opposite side, I'm a light Nazi. I will turn off lights. I will turn off electricity. I will make sure to flip breakers off. And my wife is the exact opposite. Because we had a couple instances where I flip a breaker off because I think there's nothing in, and it turns out her phone was charging, and then she comes home to a dead cell phone, and I have to hear about it.
Cents.
Yeah,
and
to
dollars.
save cents, to save
But is that
electricity.
like your primary, like,
Did you grow up in a family that was like that?
Yeah, my dad was a bit of a light Nazi, but I don't know. For me, it's just a simple, easy way to save a few cents here and there. Where my wife would say, "That's ridiculous. That's over obsessive." So
I think it's like that way with my dad and water.
I mean,
yeah,
used to
water's
be-
a
used
big
to
one
be-
too.
My dad's not so much like this now, but there's a point when I used to take hour-long showers because
I'm impressed.
you take showers when you're sad and you're a teenager. So I'd take these hour-long showers, and my
Time of
dad would be
solitude.
like, "You can't do that. You're wasting so much money." And now I'm like, now I can't take showers that are longer than like 10 minutes because I'm so worried.
Now, how
about
much of that has to do with your dad's upbringing and
I actually,
potentially?
to be honest, I think it has both to do with how he was raised.
You know, but
and
that's
also how-
more rational because water heaters fire a huge amount of energy if they're electric. I mean, those 4,500 watt rods.
Oh yeah.
They're pumping it. I mean, if you want to talk about things that use
Pumping it.
electricity in your house, your
Which
hot
one?
water heater, if it's electric, is one of the main
Yeah.
sources. If you have LED lights, which I hope that you
Oh,
have
yeah.
come into the 21st century,
Welcome.
they only
No, I
use
still
like
burn whale
3 to
candles,
6.
actually.
Well, I don't
Whale
know. Whale, no.
I use
okay.
a cast iron.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm gonna have PETA on me.
If you have LEDs, they're like 6 to 8 watts a piece. Even if you had your whole house on, it's like probably the equivalent of having 2 normal incandescent bulbs on.
Yeah.
So, which just kind of gets into the idea, of maybe cognitive dissonance. Like, you believe you're saving a ton of energy,
I know.
but in actuality,
I
Maybe
do know
not.
that the perception of what's good for us and what's saving money versus what actually does.
I do have to say though, like with the amount of hand sanitizer that you use on a regular basis, you were prepped for COVID.
Yeah. No,
This guy,
Me
every
too.
time he goes anywhere, he was like,
I was sanitizing
to the
guy
point that his
before
hands
this.
would crack at times because
Yeah.
he'd use it so much. But he's prepped for COVID. He's ready to go.
I was that teenager in school who had like dozens of little like hand sanitizers. My mom would be like, "Oh, you need a hand sanitizer? Here you go." And it would just culminate in my bag. So my parents were like, "Do you have enough hand sanitizer?" And I'm like, "Do you not know who I lived with for the past 20 years? Of course I have enough hand
Yeah.
sanitizer. I also have an ungodly amount of aloe vera and alcohol rub because
To cancel it out.
like, well, if you mix them together,
Oh, yeah,
you
yeah,
make hand
yeah.
sanitizer.
Yeah.
My parents run a home for disabled
Okay.
adults, so they have a lot of cleaning supplies. But
Yeah.
they were like prepped, primed. They were
Yeah.
like toilet paper for days, and I was like, I don't need this. The school
It's
is
even
giving
more
us.
valuable than gold.
Oh yeah, the school gives us free toilet paper. Yeah, It's thin. It's
I think you pay enough for it.
Single ply toilet
I
paper.
think I do too.
That's true.
I think I do
Free
too.
is a it's like Inigo Montoya from Princess Bride. You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Oh, that was good. That was good.
Yeah.
By the way, my kids have been totally indoctrinated into Princess Bride. They now love it and think it's their favorite movie
Me
ever.
too.
I believe that shows as a parent I have
33 years
arrived.
old. That came out 87.
I know, but anyway, to
I'm
me
old
that's a
enough-
personal like.
Yeah.
I'm old enough where there's actually a parody on it now, like Deadpool 2. they did like a little
Oh, I
Christmas
haven't
special
seen
where they
Deadpool.
tied the kid who was in the bed to the actual bed that they filmed it in, and they did the whole movie, but they cut out all the blood and the cuss words for the kids, so they
Yeah.
made a PG-13 movie. But you have these cutscenes where Deadpool's reading the Deadpool story to the kid, and he's just like, please let me go to my family. I want to leave here. I never wanted to do that movie in the first place. And it's great.
Oh, now I gotta go find that. Oh,
great.
possibly the most total movie of all time. All right, we could dive into this for if you watch the show, you know we could literally talk about anything for hours. But
Seems like a
we have
regular
more
meeting.
pressing issues to get to. Okay, so my second life question of the day that I want to get your thoughts on. I heard this actually in discussion on the radio the other day. Somebody was talking about their friend who asked them to help move to their new house they were buying, and when they dive into it a little deeper and figure out where they're moving everything to, and realize, wow, this is a pretty ritzy neighborhood. Realize they spent $700,000 on their house, and their question was, if you were buying a house that expensive, is it cool? Is it socially couth to ask your friends to help you to move for free, or are you obliged to hire movers at that point? Like, what's the threshold where you should say, hey, if you're buying a house this nice, I don't know, apparently, I'm,
Your face was totally blocked. There we go.
oh, my gorgeous
I know your hands flail and you're gonna hit it, but that's okay.
words and things.
Yeah, see, you already
just
did it.
literally like that.
You did that out of an example, and you still.
I know, I can't, I just can't restrain
He
myself.
can't
I'm
move.
sorry.
Stop moving his hands.
Like Ricky Bobby. I just want
You should see him in the studio. He like does this and he knocks something off the counter. and
It's true. I need my space. I need my.
That's
big
why I
brother.
always controlled the computer board and everything.
I'm not allowed to touch it.
Burn my
Ever.
station down.
He's a master of that. Okay, so that just got me thinking because I've helped a lot of friends move over the years, and they're good, loving friends. They're families from church, especially just moving to the area.
I think it would send a clear signal that you're cheap. That's what it would say to me. You
That
just
you,
bought a
uh,
$750,000 house, and you're like, "Yo, I need help moving though."
That's
it's like
that's like I don't
you
think
can
that's,
hire a mover.
What that's okay. No. I disagree with that.
Okay.
My
Yeah,
auntie,
disagreement. This is
my
good.
my auntie, she's.
But I love that you dropped auntie. That's an underused inflection.
I think she's inspired me to like say it's like auntie's just so like
Yeah.
common, and she's
Yeah.
she's anything but common, so she's very cool. She just moved into a mildly expensive house.
Mildly.
When I say mildly, I say that with deep sarcasm.
Gotcha. I'm
she
gonna add
moved-
some zeros.
She yeah, she moved
Does she
to
have to have two routers because it's so big from end to end for the internet?
yes, I believe so. That's
I
think,
like this auntie
I
of yours.
feel like that's an actual.
But she only
thing.
has one bridge over the moat instead of two.
So she moved into this house, and you know, my grandfather, he's not old. I don't think that my grandfather's old, but he is at that age where you know things are hurting.
Yeah.
And so you know, she asked him to help him move. She asked my mom. She asked my dad, and I think it's more of a I think it's like cultural. Like it's
Yeah.
maybe not cultural, but maybe something even lower than that. It's just polite. I think. You know, when I asked my family to to help me move in, I didn't really need their help. You know, I didn't need it. Like I think that when people don't need help and they ask for it, it's like talking to someone without really knowing what you're going to talk about. You just want them to be with you. It's an excuse to be
Yeah.
with your family, and I think it's an excuse to be with your friends.
Fair
Like make it a day. Like if you ever heard that expression, of course you have. You make it a day. Like
Yeah.
you're setting up a day to go do something. I think my friend and I do this a lot, where we're like, let's plan the whole day together. Let's pretend like we're.
And
No,
you know
we
what's
have the
interesting
time.
is I said that, but the reality is that everybody who's ever asked me for help moving, who bought it, I've always helped.
Yeah, of course.
So
Regardless of the
yeah,
value of the house.
it's one of those things that I think is you're right. You do make it a
Yeah.
day, and you know sometimes I guess maybe you.
Are they obliged to at least provide lunch?
Oh, of course.
Oh,
yeah.
100%.
Now that would be really bush league
But
if
I
they
think-
didn't even have like pizza or donuts.
I think
for
it
ya.
would come down to how well you really know them. Like if I
Yes.
barely knew someone, I think it would be more awkward. But like
Yeah.
you're saying, like if it's family and stuff like that, or even close friends, I'm definitely gonna have definitely gonna have an idea of like, yeah, I should help them. Like,
Well, yeah, in every and that's we just think. Well, and then also people we've helped move have helped us move over the years. It's a bit of a hey, thanks for being there for me. I'm gonna help be here for you. And yes, I think there's an obligation to at least provide because I don't think I've ever receive money for helping to move. It's just we're doing favors, we're helping out, we're taking care of each other and being
I feel like
neighborly.
that's even more rude than just being cheap, is giving money to your family for helping you move. You're like,
Right.
here's
Yeah.
a transaction for
Well, I
your
never actually
services.
helped my
you know?
family. My family's been in the exact same house. They moved there like a month before I was born, so they've
Yeah.
never moved in their life.
Sure.
But just friends. And another point I'll make to this is I've always been one to say that perception isn't always reality as far as what you own. Like, there may be certain
Right.
circumstances. Maybe, their house was gifted to. Maybe it was their parents' house and they're moving it. Maybe they don't have a ton of money, but their house is real nice. Maybe they got an
Assets
amazing
are
deal on
not
it 'cause they're
cash.
short sale. What's it?
Assets are not cash.
Exactly. Like we have a good pastor friend who moved a couple years ago, and their house is quite valuable for the neighborhood. But what you don't know about that is one, it's very important for them to be close to the neighborhood, close to their physical congregation, be within walking distance, and a place where people can be. So that's one where they can't just go wherever, because you could say, well, go out of town and you can get more house for your money. It's important for them. They have a ton of people over, have a ton of gatherings. They need a big space. It was a short sale, so they got a killer deal on it and had to
Right.
fix up a ton. And they drive incredibly simple used cars. They don't vacational. That's what they spend their money on. So even though you could look at their house and say, my goodness, that's an expensive house, that's where they choose to put their assets in for many reasons. So there's more to just, you have this nice of a house, that means you have this level of living. Like we drove, and Richard can attest to this, we were gifted a Cadillac from my grandpa when he got too old to drive. And people like to rib me as, oh, Mr. Fancy Cadillac driver. I'm like, first of all, your minivan you drive,
On it,
yes,
by the
the
way.
engine
So it
literally
wasn't.
stopped pumping oil in the middle of I-5. That was the whole thing. I'm like, first of all, it was a gift. I would not go out and buy a new-ish Cadillac.
I don't think anybody does. I think they're just
Yeah.
given-
Well, but the other thing is just the perception of like, if you look
Secondhand.
at old BMWs, they're actually not that expensive.
No.
But you can buy one, and then as a status symbol, people will think
Yeah.
that's a lot of
Because
money.
it's a
But actually,
BMW.
older like BMW 3 Series, they're not actually that expensive. They're just really expensive to maintain.
When I had friends who drove minivans, I'm like, I blue booked it. Your minivan is worth twice as much as my Cadillac. But it's perception that you're driving a Cadillac, you must be a bigwig.
Trust of the company as well. People will pay twice the amount of a product, just because a company goes, hey, you can trust us. It's I think, your hypothetical situation, like helping your friends move and whatnot, even though you have this huge house. It's like responsibility versus, I guess, cultural responsibility. I don't think that's like a good comparison, but I think possibly we confuse like wide accepted responsibility with like our tiny responsibility. So it's like it's a responsibility to keep in touch with our family.
Yeah.
And so of course I'm gonna ask you to help me make it a day. But of course, like, you don't want to bother your family. You don't want to like impede
You don't wanna be a
anything.
burden.
Right. So
Yeah.
of course you would hire a mover. But I think it's just whatever you choose, just make sure it's like true to what you believe. If you don't want to bother your family,
Yeah.
at least ask first. If they go, hey, we're busy, then maybe hire movers and stuff.
Well, and it's also, you mentioned the cultural aspect. I think that's something we miss out on in Western American culture here, where our way of giving is to say, here, I'll give you something. I'll give you money. I'll give you this thing in exchange for this. In many Eastern cultures, the way of giving is by sharing services. Again, you were there for me, I'll be there for you.
Is trade.
Exactly. I paid my way through undergrad and seminary serving and bartending at a wonderful Mexican restaurant in Vancouver. Shout out Azteca, Manuel and crew if you're listening. Wonderful, wonderful, best boss I ever had. Prior to my work with the current organization I'm with, for anybody else who's listening. Anyway, and it was a great story. I learned a lot about the Hispanic culture during my time there. I was actually the only white server there for a while, so that gave me some unique perspective as well of being the odd one out in a cultural circumstance. And one of the things that I learned from the staff there is that in large segments of the Hispanic culture, and this goes for other cultures as well, you don't necessarily give money to help somebody out. You, again, provide services. You say, hey, so-and-so, he is an amazing mechanic. He can help you fix your car, and I'm, really great at building houses. I can help you with repairs or landscaping. It's like this idea of serving one another versus saying, oh, you need help with that. Here's some money, just go hire who you need, go do what you need with it. And so the idea of support looks different in a lot of non-Western cultures. Um, so I think we have lost that sense of just being neighborly by providing acts of service to one another. That sort of communal sense here. I'm not bashing, Western society. I'm not bashing the American way of doing things. I think there's a lot of great cultural contributions, but I think that is one thing that we've missed out upon in the decadence of being the richest nation on earth in the history of the earth for many years. That because I've fallen into this trap sometimes where it's almost easier to send money than to take my time and go help. Where if you if you say, hey, I need help moving, can you show up at 7 a.m. Saturday morning and help? I'd be like, here's $25 or 30, whatever.
Yeah, and I feel like I probably misspoke earlier. I should recant what I said, where I was like, oh, I think they were cheap. I shouldn't say that. I think they were cheap, but I think it's situationally dependent. I think my gut would be like, oh, well, why do you need help? But for example, I know a friend of mine, his mom moved from California, and the moving company quoted her $10,000, which I was like, that's absurd.
Yeah.
To pack up your whole
Depending on
house.
how
And
much
so
you
he
have.
went down there, and I actually had offered to help. He went down there and moved her up here for like $1,000.
Yeah.
And so that makes sense.
Exactly.
I guess that's wise money.
Yeah.
Rather than paying the $10,000.
Say, hey, if I'm going to pay some, I'd rather pay.
But if it's
you.
moving across town, maybe that way I might be like, but I don't think it's bad to help, and I probably shouldn't have said that. So.
No.
I think
I don't know.
personally, I think my take on it is that we like to avoid interpersonal conflicts and whatnot. And I think it's easier to just throw money at somebody and say, hey, go buy yourself something nice. I think, for me personally, if I always ask for money on Christmas because,
Cash is king.
it's like you get to decide what you do with that cash. And I think that we want to avoid people's personal wants so much because they conflict maybe with our own that we're just willing to avoid that and throw money at them. That's
Exactly.
really what you're doing when you, of course, to my grandmothers who have given me money, I do not believe that you don't want to talk to me or you want to avoid me, but throwing money at people for things like moving or doing something that is really just seen as a favor is subconsciously to avoid
When
getting on a level with
there's
that
always
person.
the conflict of different values too. Like for example, someone I know just recently explained that they got their husband this equipment that they wanted, but they don't have the value that their husband does, which is you have to get the best possible deal on the equipment. Otherwise, so they opened it on Christmas and the first thing out of the person's mouth was, "What did you spend on this?" Now it doesn't
That's
mean
the same
they,
thing my wife asked me when I proposed.
It
How much?
doesn't-
Dead serious. I love you, dear. She asked me how much I spent on the ring.
But
Does she
there's
wanna know I didn't
conflicting,
spend too much?
sometimes there's conflicting values of
Yeah.
what ultimately values. And in that person's mind, it wasn't just the gift, it was the what did you spend on it? And then they sent it back and got it a better deal. And, this person was telling me, they're like, oh, I thought I'd scored, I had remembered.
Well, when
They
you're sharing the
asked
same
for it,
bank account when you're
and,
married, that's
and
obviously
all this other stuff.
different
And so,
too.
but, does that make someone horribly? No. It just,
No.
it is, there's conflicting values there about what's important.
Well,
So-
my wife and I, we don't, outside of Christmas, we don't do presents for each other. We say, it's coming from the same place. We have one bank account. Let's not rob Peter to pay Paul. Let's take the money we would have spent on presents, and if we want to go get something for ourselves, just get it. Or let's put it in and go put it towards vacation.
what my parents do.
Yeah. Do an event together.
It's very healthy.
Yeah. Now, my wife always has to get something anyway because she's a huge gift giver, gift maker. It's also challenging, too, when it's somebody who's in a much higher socioeconomic group than you. Like, our parents, are obviously a lot more well-off than we are, so it's always weird. It's like anything we could afford to get them, they could just go buy for themselves. So we try to personalize it. My wife makes calendars of the grandchildren, with different pictures throughout the year, different things we did this last year and highlights. And she customizes it and makes them. That's something they can't just hop on Amazon and buy, for themselves. So there's an element of that too, of the sentimental, hey, this is something that money can't buy that I want to get you. But those are becoming harder and harder to find these days.
I think I'd like to change my answer, actually. I don't think it's a...
All right, change your answer and then we'll move on to the.
I don't think it's
on
to
the day.
avoid. I think that as we talk a little bit more, I think it's less about avoiding. I think it's in certain situations, things that you just do for family. If you're paying them and saying, go get yourself something nice, or you're just kind of avoiding that interaction. I think so. But I'm thinking about all the times that my family has just given me money because they have no idea what I want, and I get that. I'm very hard to read sometimes.
Yeah, that to me, I think that's the ultimate thing. I think gift giving is really hard for me. It's like a mystery unless I knew exactly what they told me to do. I feel like I'm shooting in the dark, and then I don't want to commit because I feel like I'm going to make a mistake.
Exactly.
And yeah, so gift giving is actually really hard for me because of that reason. And it's interesting because my mom is a big gift giver. Like she really thinks through things and personalizes them, and like I'm like, I wish I could think like that, but I just don't. Unless someone tells me exactly what they want, it's a really hard for me to like figure it out.
Yeah. We could dive down this rabbit trail a little bit deeper, but since we're already 35 minutes in and we have less than an hour to go, and we haven't even got to the content of the day, perhaps we should skedaddle on. I need to get an off-topicometer, like a button. We had that with one of our students at our worship gatherings. Yes, we're off topic. Okay, so thank you.
I will focus.
Please do. Just smash the table until you get an off.
Don't smash the table.
We'll
The
just
mics
move
will
this
vibrate.
down here.
Oh, what could possibly happen? It's clicked in.
Lots
Can't
of things
possibly
can
break. Okay,
happen.
It's almost like there are two phones on the table.
One of our favorite segments on the show, and this actually transitions to it well, talking about Western society and living in the richest nation on earth. There's what we like to call first world problems. We all have a couple. We probably experience them every day. I experienced one this last week that I realized, again, I have no right to really complain about. So, long story short, I synced my cable remote up to our TV to run it, and somehow it put because we have a smart TV, so it put the hub in haywire where we would just do the home button on our TV remote, take us to Netflix, all our streaming stuff that we could access. We don't have accounts or everything, but those that we do, YouTube, so we can pull it up on our TV. And when it did that, somehow it threw everything into chaos, and I couldn't access it from the hub. So I basically had to completely reset everything, and it was quite this endeavor.
Press buttons.
Yeah, I had to press buttons, re-enter.
Like a lot of buttons.
A lot of buttons. And you know how hard
And you had to remember the things that you did on those accounts, like your username and your password.
Yeah, like I don't remember any of my passwords. Well, some of them were my wife's emails.
Cat meow 7894834, something like that, right? Yeah, and then you had to remember, and then you remember which one you put to which one, and where did the capital go?
Yes.
Yeah, these first world problems.
Seriously, well, and having
My
to
heart
type
goes out to
something
you.
with
I
the
just want
TV
you to know.
remote, we had to do it one at a time, and you had to scroll up, and then if you press the wrong one, and that got me thinking of I have this magic box that I can access all my streaming services I want. The fact that we even have streaming services at our fingertips. And I was getting frustrated because I had to press a bunch of buttons to reset it. And this gets back to the things we gladly spend money on. And there's a lot of things my wife and I are incredibly frugal on. One of the things that we agree is we'll pay a little bit, because we still have cable. We haven't cut the cord yet. And I know, and I envy that. For me, it would have to get, if you're talking about like $15 to $20 a month we save, which is about what it is for everything we would still want. For me, it's worth it for the convenience of having it all in one location versus having all these different streaming services together.
Generally, I know you're a big sports guy, so
that's my thing. If we're
The light bulbs, but
Really?
he gets really depressed during sports season, especially if his teams aren't
we
doing
haven't
well.
had any. I haven't anything to be
So I wonder if your mental health is better.
Are you
That's
okay?
another
Do you need
first
to
world
talk?
problem.
No, golf came back yesterday.
Well, that's good.
No fans on the course.
Wait.
Yeah, no.
You spend hours partaking of golf.
Oh heck yes, I do.
What's wrong with golf?
Come
What's
on.
wrong with golf, Richard? What's wrong with golf?
Are you racist against the Scottish?
No.
Should I wear a kilt in here next week and see?
I feel like it's
Vegas
watching pool. Like yes,
Flames?
I feel like golf is a highlight sport. It's
Oh.
no. Like I'm not gonna waste 5 hours of my life watching a tournament.
Okay.
I want the highlight 15-minute version where they're like, look at this unbelievable shot.
Richard's
Look at how they.
He
Come-
lacks
No,
patience. You
it's
lack patience. It's not just a game.
basketball is a game
No,
of
no, no,
back and
no, no,
forth.
no.
Like you're on your seat,
I got
you
nothing
don't
against
know what's gonna
basketball. Love
happen.
basketball.
It's
Like,
not just a game. It's
strategy, yeah.
yes. Okay. Imagine tag, professional tag.
that
Professional
was on the
tag.
OSHA
Professional
Now-
dodgeball.
Now slow it down.
Let's lower the standard,
It's-
shall we?
No, professional tag is actually kind of dope. Oh, I know you know because
That
you
elicited
kn-
a reaction
I
of
heard
ours.
I heard the nose flare over there, and I know
Please.
you've seen it.
No.
It's awesome. If you just slow it, it's like golf. It's strategy. You have to know what your move is. Like like you
No,
have.
this is like
Imagine
professional
the
chess.
mental.
Professional tag would be like professional chess.
Okay,
not
fine.
Like professional golf.
chess. I don't see chess as a.
Golf is
Sport.
just a really, it's not bad. It's like, it'd be cool to watch it in person, but I would personally never sit down and dedicate like 3 hours to watching the Masters tournament. I would go, what happened at the Masters tournament? Give me the recap in 15 minutes. Thank you.
And see, again, it's not.
I saw the awesome shots. It was great. It was cool.
The most exciting thing I think about sports is just the two scores at the end, who won, who lost. That's fine.
No,
It is a
no.
box score guy.
I'm not a
No.
sports person either, but I think my family, my
So
dad's
is
sides
this.
of the family, is really passionate about
Right.
golf. So I have to be
No.
in a way.
Another rat.
Disc golf, I'm totally like all in on disc
So you
golf.
watch
That's
professional
awesome.
disc golf
Disc
for hours?
golf.
Yeah, because I can do regular disc golf.
you
and it doesn't
relate-
cost
Wow.
a ton of money.
It's the
Just
same
like
with-
I can play basketball
Yeah.
at any time of the
Wow.
day. That's one of the reasons I think it's one of the most popular sports. People can relate to it.
Well, see,
Although I
play a
can't
lot of
relate to
golf,
being
so-
awesome LeBron James and jumping like over
can't
everybody's
really.
head and dunking on them.
If you believe you can do it, you can.
No,
You could do
or
it.
you know,
Just get taller.
I'm gonna mess up his name, and I'm Greek.
Antetokounmpo.
Antetokounmpo, like the guy
Yes.
can just like I can't relate to that, but I can relate to playing basketball
Yeah.
regularly. Like everybody can
There-
do it to some
There's an
degree.
element of that. Of you, it's so hard to relate to that because it's not something you can possibly even comprehend.
Golf ball 300 yards. I just can't.
If you practice.
believe in yourself.
If you practice
I probably
hard.
could, but it's like, nah.
This gets to the question I'd love to go over one
It's
time:
expensive.
the idea of fairness, and you mentioned and this is a whole rabbit trail.
So, but wait, let's continue
Yeah.
on. So you're
Okay,
mad.
so
You
my
got it.
first
You
world
had
problem-
okay.
Yeah, that was my first world problem I discovered of the week, and
And then the
I
other
did-
first world problem I think we discovered
I
is
need to go
like
empty my
now you
bladder,
have
so
to
I'm gonna let
now
guys
you have to
hash this out,
decide
I'll be right back.
Okay.
what to
Maybe
watch
it's
and
go
what
through.
to spend, your allocated time doing. And I think the first world problem that I see as a major first world problem is that we can do more with our time than there is time to allot to do.
Can you?
Oh yeah,
Can you say
let's
that ag-
unpack that. You
can
want me
you-
to say it again?
It-
I'll say it 5 times fast.
Well, no. Do you mean like no, just say it again real quick because I can because I think I know what you're talking about, but I'm not ready to like.
There is more to do with our time than there is time to do with it.
Yeah, you lost me again.
There is more to do than we have the time to allot to do it.
All right.
That's the simplest way I can think of saying it. So you could watch everything in the world. Think about YouTube. YouTube is an endless pit. You get in
God,
there,
yeah, it
and you're
is.
like 5 hours later, like, how did I?
You're watching
end up?
Game Grumps, you fall asleep, and then there's some
Right.
guy.
There is more
teaching you how to pick up cats.
consume
Mhm.
than you could possibly have time to consume it.
Mhm.
I don't like. I would. So that's a first world problem. Like we're constantly on the verge of like, where do I spend my time? What's quality time? And I say screen time. I mean, these are first world problems. I think of people who scroll through. I mean, I don't do this, but people scroll through Facebook and they're thinking like, who do I need to unfriend today? Who should I do this to or whatever? And it's like, I wanna have real relationships with people. Like imano, talk it out, all that type of stuff. So those are all like kind of first world problems that I think we deal with that probably other people, those aren't the life decisions that they're making.
Environment.
Size with Garrett's remote issue. That's
Oh, of course.
deeply troubling, and we should
I
all
mean,
shed a tear.
I think I had an issue yesterday. I was putting up my fairy lights, and my command strip kept falling off, and I got frustrated. But thinking about how people have it worse than me doesn't help. I think a lot of people think that their issues are like when I think saying something is a first world problem is kind of. God, that does sound kind of weird to say. I don't want to say it's disrespectful, but it's like you're not taking into account why it frustrates you. You're just saying, oh, it's an issue that nobody else has, so it's not an issue. It's like me putting up my fairy lights. It's like I didn't have an issue with the command strip. I had an issue with the fire safety. It's like you have to think about why it's an issue to you, and your button.
My button.
Yeah, your button
my button
issue.
issues.
Your button issues.
Is that
Your
an easy button?
I think it's yeah. It's time.
But
Right. It's also time. It's like you're like my time is being wasted by such a small thing because in your head that this is not important, and you're like my time is being wasted. Where, oh my God, my hands are. I put
Well,
my
it's not,
hands-
you'd rather waste it in the way you want to waste it.
Right.
It's like I can
I
waste it
feel
in a way
like
that brings more pleasure to me than fiddling with buttons.
in
Yeah.
my life, I mean, Garrett, you shared a very personal story about this. I'm not going to share it for you, but the whole idea the next day you woke up and it was like the most beautiful day
Oh,
you've ever
yeah,
seen.
yeah.
So
Most
I
fathers.
do think that there's context
Yeah.
puts things into perspective, I think. And so, like, you're right. I'm not trying to just invalidate all first world problems, but I do think that, when we want to talk about issues that are like really, really important to us, sometimes the broader you go in looking at the world and the context, the more it puts things in the right perspective.
Sure.
And I think
Yes.
context is so important. And so I think we half-heartedly joke about first world problems because it is easy for us to forget
Sure.
there's what, 350 million Americans now?
330,
330?
give or take. Yeah.
There's like 7 billion other people in this world
Of course.
who have all sorts of different things that they're engaging with.
Do you know we're the third most populous nation on Earth, though? But I discovered So I was hearing this the other day. So China has, I think, 1.45. India has 1.4, and you go all the way down to 330 million for us. Like the drop off between 2 and 3 is massive.
I mean, think of all the people who like don't have clean running water
Yeah.
every day. I do think that if you could put yourself into their shoes and you could spend some time thinking about people whose problems aren't the same, and maybe in some ways I think we sometimes in first world countries we manufacture our problems. Not in everything,
Ooh, yeah.
but there's a certain sense in which you would have a different perspective going, wow, like every day I just get up and there's water and I don't think about it and I don't even
Yeah.
have a value like of that's important, where a huge chunk of the world maybe has that issue. And so I do think there's a healthy balance of like putting things into proper perspective gives you the right tools, I would say, to adequately understand the context of life.
Sure.
Yeah.
So where you're sitting there going, my remote won't work, I have a TV, like I can take a timeout. I think that's pretty important. I try to work with my kids on that, where they can totally just lose sight of things and become, the word I want to use, and it may not be a right word, is petty. Children can become petty.
Yeah.
And they can fight over the dumbest of things. And then you pull them
Yes.
back and you say, let's look at the context.
Oh, yes.
Yesterday, my children fought over who got to wear which boots. And I was like, does it really matter? Do you all have boots to wear? Yes. Why do you need to wear that one? Well, because I thought these ones were mine. Well, these ones are half an inch too big. This was their thinking. And I was like, guys, perspective.
My sons will literally
Large scale,
trump
like
clothes.
you all have boots. You can all go out and tromp around in the creek if you have the right boots on. And if you have boots rather than no boots. So there was a moment of like, aha, okay, that's like just because my foot's gonna wiggle around there a little bit, it's not that big of a deal. So I feel like context does help us do that if we can all.
I'll give Rosie the
And
last
if you
word as
disagree,
well.
jump right in.
I don't necessarily
Trudge
disagree.
forward.
I just want to like add to it.
Go for it.
It all comes down to like compromise. It's like I'm going to compromise to like wear this boot. I'm gonna like look at the
Yeah.
big perspective and go, I'm gonna wear this boot even though it's not fun or something. But little compromises like that at like a young age, they're really big. Like I remember when I was a kid and I had to maybe do something for my parents that I didn't want to. I had to compromise. That led to a lot of other compromises that I kind of regret in a way. Like if there's a repetitive pattern of compromising, I feel like you as a person sometimes turn out to be compromisable. And I get why some people are like, I want this right now. I want this and I want it my way. And I get that in a kind of way because we all want what we want. I think it's just a nice balance of like not so much compromising but figuring out a problem within the problem and then solving it together, because compromise means you're giving something up. With me and my family, we go, we're not going to compromise, we're going to look at the problem, find another problem together within that problem, and then figure it out ourselves where we can come to an agreement instead of a compromise. It's like the issue really isn't that the boot's too big, it's that it isn't his boot and he likes his things. So it's like, hey, wear this boot and I'll get you some new shoes. like later that fit you, that make you, comfortable.
Well, yeah, someone else wanted to wear the boot, but yeah. Though, just to offer a little, like, isn't it fair to say though that like the inability to compromise is in some ways, I don't, people probably may not like it, but like childish. Like when we get to a big picture problem and we're trying to find a solution, if there is no compromise, like I would think that in a large majority of cases, like for example, your roommate, I'm sure you compromise all the time because you live with a roommate, right? Or there's always ways in which like adults have to learn how to get along.
Of course.
Of like,
Compromise is important. I'm
Right.
not like disregarding it
Right.
at all. I'm just saying like there's another option that you can both choose together, which is not so much compromising for the other person, but again, seeing another problem within that problem, seeing what the real issue is, and not just like dismissing it. But again, something as small as that, like the boot thing, I totally understand like compromising, but something as big as like territory or social rights or something like that, if you have a disagreement, I get why there would be a large populace of people who disagree and don't want to compromise. And people don't, they think either you're compromised or you're out of the game, and that's not necessarily true. We learned in I think it was public relations, that there are a lot of things you can do instead of compromise with something. You can, again, try to see what the actual problem is together.
Right.
And
All right, I'm
solve
going to
that.
slam the move forward button and give
Moving
our
forward.
wonderful guest the last word on that one.
I'm
So
good.
that's one of the guest perks, is that you automatically get the last word. Plus, I like spiting Richard. It's one of the few joys of my life. So we're going to jump ahead here because we do want to have sufficient time for our question of the day, which we are building to, I promise. But I also want to talk about our cliche of the day that, again, for those who are familiar with the work that we do here, we always say cliches aren't cliches because they're not untrue. It's cliches because they're incomplete, or they try to take a nuanced, complicated situation and oversimplify it. And that's exactly what we're against, is this oversimplification, putting everything into this one perfect box where it isn't necessarily. That you can have a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. So cliche I was thinking about today, I've heard this one a lot before, and there's a lot of good intention behind it. And growing up in the church, growing up in the Christian faith as well, and studying and being in the ministry for many years now, something I've heard a lot of mentors and a lot of people say is the idea that people don't care what you know until they know that you care. And what they mean by that is, and there's, again, a lot of truth behind this, is that you can come with facts and information and present to somebody why you should believe this, or why what you do believe is wrong, why what you're doing is wrong, and you should do this instead. You should eat this instead of that because of X, Y, and Z, because it will help you to live longer, because it will give you more energy, because it will do, all these magic things. But the idea is, unless you've established, we have a phrase called putting credits in the bank, unless you've established that you have their best interests looked out for, that you're doing this because you love them and you care about them and you want the best for them, unless you've established some sort of personal investment within them, they are so disinclined to listen to your information, to listen to the facts and the data that you might present.
Very true.
Very true, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I have an issue with that. Like, if there's not some sort of like link of trust within you're the group of trying,
Exactly.
like, we learned about this in persuasion as well. It's like with rhetoric, the first thing you do when you're addressing an audience is showing them that you care,
Yeah.
showing them that you empathize with them, or showing them that you're on at least some sort of level with them that they can relate to, because people
Yes.
will not listen to anything you have to say unless you have their best interests in mind. And I think that's, what a community does. They have everyone's best interests in mind because, you live near them and they affect
Exactly.
you. People won't listen to facts
Mutual
if,
interest.
it's like, I have a friend who won't listen to, actually, they're not really a friend, they're more of an acquaintance. They won't listen to anybody who isn't from America. So like, they're like, I don't listen to any, I don't like no philosophers, like, no teachers, no doctors. And he's like,
Unless they're American.
unless they're like, and it's South America and North America as well.
Oh, okay,
it's
gotcha.
including,
Gotcha.
but
The
they're like,
Americas.
if they're not from here, then I don't want to hear it. It's like, It's like, and I wondered why he always mentioned that. It's like maybe he doesn't think that somebody on the other side of the ocean doesn't have or his best interest in mind, but I think that's an extreme
What if it was an American
case.
living abroad? That just blow his mind.
I think he'd literally just blow up. I think his brain would literally
I'm
explode.
American, but I'm not in America.
That's a nice paradox. I'd like.
Or what
to
if it was a
address.
foreign national? What if it was someone from Egypt living in America? Well, I mean, so Americans. I mean, again, you got to define. You got to pin them down on that.
Yeah.
So I do. Yeah, I think that we put these categories up and say, this person is somebody who has my interests looked out for, shares my interests, I'm going to be inclined to listen to them. And there is an element where you have so much data that's out there, you have so much information, you know, we are inclined to look and say, okay, I believe this person actually cares about me and wants the best, so I'm going to even subconsciously be biased to what they're saying, even though it might not line up best to the actual facts or actual data. And so I think this is true. And again, when we share information, the purpose of groups like the Agora, of the personal engagement, the work that we do in ministry, and particularly with college students, is the idea that we want to demonstrate to them that we do care about them, we do have their best interests looked out for, to where they say, man, if this person who clearly loves me and cares about me is telling me I need to reconsider this, I need to think about X, Y, or Z, maybe I should do it. Even if I don't quite understand it, I don't understand necessarily everything they're saying, but I understand they love me and they care about me. Now, the danger behind that is you can also use that for evil, where that's how cults flourish.
I mean, again,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure every politician is well versed in
I'm
rhetoric.
one of you.
Yeah, and it's like, no, you're not.
I'm gonna wear a flannel shirt and khaki pants and go
You're
in
one
my
of us.
commercial and buy
You're-
groceries at the local hardware store to demonstrate that I'm an everyman.
As long as you own Columbia, you're my politician. Am I right?
Yeah, it's like it's like there's a law in the state of Oregon that if you're an Oregon politician running for office,
You have to own a hydro flask. You at least have to own one bar of soap that has been handcrafted by somebody under the age of 40, and you have to own.
Don't hate on
Columbia
the
gear.
handcrafted soap.
Well, I'm not hating. That's
good
and
stuff.
you have to believe that Sasquatch is real.
Yes.
Even if like
Wait, he's not?
exactly.
He's the ultimate social distancer.
Yeah. He's just
always so
Yes.
he's just a forest agent.
It doesn't matter if he's real. If he's real to you, that's what
It
matters.
just matters if he's real in your heart.
Exactly. So, Richard, while you were doing whatever it is you got up to do, I don't even want to speculate.
Very
I was gonna-
happily, and I was like, is he done?
Well, you were looking at your screen.
The coffee.
Okay, I didn't know if it was just the call of nature, or it looked like you were looking at your screen.
Anyway,
So I was like,
let's
but we were talking about the idea that people don't care what you know until they know that you care, and how that is true. We talk about putting credits in the bank as we meet with students, we meet with young people to try to share information with them by establishing that we love them and we care about them, that because we love them and care about them, we think they should reconsider or they should consider X, Y, and Z as far as propositional information. But the idea that also it can be used for evil if you desire, and again, that's how cults and that's how a lot of radical movements get started, is they demonstrate that they love and care about people, and you're allowed to put faulty information in their mind as well. So somebody might love you and care about you and have bad information, and somebody might not personally be invested in you but actually have
power
correct
and
information.
some other things like
Oh, yeah.
one of the key, I think the long-standing tradition of if you want to know if you're in a cult, try to get out.
Yeah, see how easy it is to leave.
I think that you're talking about like mainstream cults that are like a cult that by definition is just a secretive religious group. But I mean, I think what you guys are talking about is like those cults that are mostly just for profit and for one person.
Yeah.
There are some cults in the United States and other places in the world that aren't necessarily sinister or bad.
Yeah, it's more the idea of, or any group, whether it's a religious worldview, but it's a group that
A tyrannic religious group that's
Yeah.
small.
or
So-
a religious.
So
but-
what was the point of bringing this up?
Well, just the idea, because it's something I've heard over the years that it's more. It's almost they're saying it's more important to show that you care than have good information. That people will listen to somebody who shows that they love and care, even if they have not as good information. And my point is that yes, but it has to be both. You should also strive for the best possible information.
And what does care look like? I think right now in our society, some people interpret caring as literally just whatever I posted on social media, you repost, and that shows that you actually cared. But you weren't there when I moved, or You weren't there when I was hurting.
The digital currency
You,
is the term.
and so like, yeah, what do we
Likes.
value? Like, do we value the idea that somebody's going to be there for you when you're actually hurting,
Yeah.
in spite of you agreeing or not agreeing? Like, I think that's I think we talked about this last week, but the idea of like, are you going to be a good neighbor to your neighbor only because you agree with them, or even in spite of it, because that's what neighbors do? And I think that gets to the heart of the message. I do think it's true that people in general don't care what you know until they know that you care, but I do think there's limits on that. Like, I think everyone's heard it explained like this: like, you're a Lego block and you only have so many attachment points.
Right.
Some people can handle a whole lot more than other people can,
Right.
and so there is. And I think personally
I picture you as
that
pirate Lego.
some of those attachment points are taken up by social media.
Right.
I really do. And
Some, I'd say the majority in a lot of cases.
And there becomes this, I don't know if I'd call it false reality, but there becomes this idea that, well, I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people who post something on social media and then I have a really long, engaging conversation with them, and it's like, yeah, why did you post that? Because I don't actually think you're in alignment with it, but there's all these other things that go along with that. So
We learned in information communication with my professor, Dr. Good, that there is a second life that we lead on social media, and I just forgot what I was about to say. Right, it denies us self-reflection because we want other people to do that for us. As somebody who's been online for a very long time, I lack a lot of self-reflection because I just expected my friends to take one good look at me and go, you know so much about me, you make your assumptions and I'll take them. Because on social media and on the internet, it's like you'll tell everybody like your major secrets. Meanwhile, they don't even know you have a dog. Like, year 2, they're like, you have a dog? And they're like, yeah. It's like, I knew that you used to wake up in the morning and drink coffee because not to wake up, but to to feel something in the morning that's sensory, but I don't know that you have a dog. That there's like stuff like that, and we put that responsibility
because we see them on social media. We feel as though
we put that responsibility on dozens of strangers, and
I've wondered if there might be some research regarding this, but I've wondered also if social media isn't a pretext to a false reality about ourselves because it only involves our thoughts. And so I don't know if that's true or not, but it's something I've wondered about, like the idea about like what we do on social media is only like, since it's a lot about like only the thought and not like what we're doing right now is dialectic, right? We're sharing ideas, thoughts, and you figure things out by going back and forth. It's the original Platonic method. Thank you, Plato. And as you study philosophy, you're going to learn about the dialectic method in Plato's discourse. But that social media lacks that. Just like when you have a thought, there's nothing to check it or nothing to like come up against it. It's just the thought itself. And I wonder if social media isn't like a vehicle for those kinds of things, where just the thought gets going. Yep. So
100%. Well, it's that I've heard described by debaters before that anybody can give a great presentation in a debate. The question of your skill and your worth is, can you survive cross-examination? Like, you can get up there and have two opposing sides of a debate. Does God exist? Does he not exist? And you can have, or which book is correct, which version of his revelation is correct, whatever it might be, whatever you might be debating. And once I can get up and they can just blow you away, because again, it's their monologue or echo chamber where they say, I have everything and I'm going to nail this guy down. But then can it survive cross-examination when the other side starts asking you questions as well? Or does it just sound good when it's a one-way discussion? I think it's like that with social.
Said of like consistency and validity. I mean, I think sometimes social media deprives people, as I said last week, of the opportunity to do the thinking themselves.
Exactly.
So like having a coherent, which nobody does, by the way, just no surprise. Even I don't. We try to have coherent worldviews, but we are always going to have something that's incoherent.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hard part about social media, is that it doesn't allow you to do the thinking or to just to process the information in a way. It demands things from you right away.
Well, so I have more respect for people, even if it's a viewpoint I completely disagree. And I try to avoid social media like the plague. Again, if you noticed, it's kind of a theme here. Unfortunately for my work and for a lot of the work we do, it's a necessary evil for something. So I do have to have some branches of it in order to communicate. And it has its purpose, certainly. But when I do get caught, diving into it, I say I have more respect for people who at least will give their original thoughts versus just clicking a meme and reposting.
Or who will actually abstain to think. And, the idea of like withholding to really process and go through information, like,
Versus
that's
like,
a
no,
bad
I gotta
thing.
get it out now. I gotta
that's-
show people I think
That's actually, it can sometimes, in fact, I think those people are the wisest. Who are willing to just sort of take a step back and think and process information and do that type of stuff.
Exactly.
I mean, it kind of goes with our whole theme that, we don't think these issues are things that can be solved with a bunch of memes or posts. And
Rosie gets the last word, and then since we're 70% of the way through, we should
I
probably
was-
skip ahead to our question.
I was just about to say that I think there's a lot of pressure to be active online. Like, there's all these memes that are like, there are like two people in this world. There are consumers and active consumers, people who give, and it's like you're so pressured to make that post to like there's a lot of people who like me, I just watch online. I rarely post anything. And again, social media conflicts with my work. It's like I need to post things, but I'm so I'm like an 80-year-old man trapped in this 20-year-old girl's body. I don't know how to use Twitter. I don't get it. I don't understand hashtags. Well, how are you only supposed to do like 128 characters, but like people are like hashtag, and I'm just sitting there like, I don't know what to do. So yeah, thank you for the last word.
You are most welcome. So I'm gonna pull an executive action here, and we're gonna go ahead and skip our viral exam of the week, which was the new normal. So we'll get to that eventually. This idea of what does it look like? What will the new normal? Yeah. People saying let's not get back to normal. Let's create a new normal. And again, there's some good elements to that, some bad elements. Was the old normal all bad? Should we completely throw everything out? Anyway, that's for another week. But since we have 22 minutes left, I want to dive into our question of the week. And I got a feeling we can carry this into next week if we really want to. But it's this idea, do two wrongs make a right? So speaking of cliches, and the concept of this is that if you have been wronged or if a group has been wronged, it's okay to do something that in a vacuum would in of itself be a wrong, but if you do it back in order to right a wrong, it becomes a right. It's a broad understanding. And in our climate these days, I think that this idea in certain camps is getting more and more acceptable, that it's okay in order to commit this wrong because of a wrong that has already been committed. And for those of you who listen to the show, we don't try to be overly political or partisan, but as a broad concept, one of the concerns I have with a lot of the progressive movement these days, and there's so many broad categories. I have many wonderful friends who would self-identify as progressives, and so I'm not trying to put everyone in a single box. There's many broad categories within that, but one of the underlying tenets is that it is okay and possible to right past wrongs with current wrongs, that it's justifiable because a particular individual or a group has been wronged to implement wrongs on another group or another individual because of what has happened. Does that make sense? Are you guys tracking with me? So my question is, can it be done and should it be done? Can two wrongs make a right? Should we use two wrongs to make a right? We could dive into more specifics, but I'll lob it up and let you guys get the ball rolling on that one.
I want to start with a question unless you want to go.
No. Let me think a little bit, and then
You got it.
I'll get it.
So what I would do is I would invite people into like a thought experiment, and I'll give you the context. I had lots of interesting conversations over the year, and I remember this has happened multiple times, but people will say, how can you be part of X, Y, and Z, whatever it is, some organization or something you think about, right? Yeah. And I remember someone said this to me, and then I pointed out, I was like, well, the history of the school you go to is X, Y, and Z. The history of the country that you're a part of is X, Y, and Z. Yeah. And the question really goes, how far back do you want to go?
The history of the human race.
Well,
X,
yeah,
Y,
but
My dad's from Athens, Greece. Okay.
The most stereotypical
The-
Greek guy you will ever meet, by the way. It's
I
like-
don't actually know if he's
Is it
stereotypical,
pronounced
but
gyro or gyro?
Euro, please, thank you. Euro.
With some tzatziki stuff.
Yeah, Tadaziki, thank you. Yeah. Okay. So I look back and I'm a student of history. I think history hopefully gives us some context or history to look at. And what's interesting is you look at Alexander the Great, conquered half the world. Well, what motivated him to do that? And I don't really know that he was justified in doing that, by the way.
His dad.
His dad and the Persians burned
Oh yeah.
Athens to the ground.
Totally forgot about that.
Yeah.
He did not forget that. And so he literally was going to go and show them what's what. And
Like you do.
it brings up this like what I'd call the pendulum effect, in that if you're going to right a wrong, are you going to create another wrong that then has to be righted? And so and then we can get into the whole personal sense of justice, because I think there are personal feelings involved in all of this. But I'm trying to get a big picture view of, like, if we say, well, this wrong now leads us to be able to do this wrong and then this wrong, do we ever get out of the cycle?
Yeah.
And I would like to make the argument that the only way to get out of the cycle is not by justice, but by forgiveness.
Yeah.
And so justice will always lead to, in some sense, a need to get back at someone else. And I don't think there's ever going to be a list of injustices in the world. I think there will be injustices for as long as there are humans. But the idea of how do you stop it? I think forgiveness is the only way to stop it, because forgiveness is you absorbing and dealing with the pain and the hurt and the suffering that someone else has done towards you, so that you don't have to take retribution. As Gandhi said, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind.
Yeah.
Where do we stop that so that we can move past that, where we don't have to then take the wrong? Because it seems to me like for as long as there are humans, this pendulum's been swinging. It's been swinging.
well, you
It doesn't
shared-
make it right.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it makes it right. I just don't know that it's ever going to get out of the cycle.
On the other hand, you have a lot of
People who take forgiveness as surrender. You have people who get back at people and go, all right, we're done. Like, you got what you deserve. Now we're done, and they get to call the shots. Which, if you think of Alexander the Great, it's kind of what happened. Persians burned down Athens, and then he salted their grounds, and then and he was like, all right, now we're done. Like, they obviously didn't get back at him in any way. But I think those people think that they can call the terms in a way, or rather, it's on the other side of the spectrum of how to deal with the two wrongs make a right kind of thing. Like, on one hand, you have people who are like, let's just forgive but not forget. And then you have other people who are like, no, you're just going to surrender and you're going to like it on our terms. And I think a lot of people take that as forgiveness now.
Well, I think the idea of so Richard, you shared this story a couple weeks ago of the Harani tribe in Ecuador, the movie Into the Spear. I doubt you're familiar with this story. It was a group of Christian missionaries in 1956 that were working with Missionary Aviation Fellowship in Ecuador, and they were the first people ever to contact this tribe in the Andes of Ecuador. Jim Elliott, Nate Saint, the whole team were down there. And anyway, they ended up being murdered on the shore of this river by the local tribe, but through their interaction, it opened up the door for missionaries to be able to go in eventually and connect with them, and they ended up becoming Christ followers. And by doing this, they were able to break the cycle of retribution, because they didn't have a concept of forgiveness in their culture. It was, somebody kills my family member, I have to kill one of theirs. Somebody steals this, I have to steal. And it just was this endless cycle of back and forth, because from their worldview, the concept of just choosing to forgive somebody and not seek retribution, even though I have, from a legal perspective, I have the right because they wronged me, it didn't exist. So the gospel to them gave them the framework by which they could say, okay, I don't have to. I can choose to forgive. I don't think that necessarily means that there is no justice. There is no seeking to right wrongs. There is no seeking to compensate. So, for example, if I am, up in a building and a crane falls on me and I have massive injuries sustained, and the company that made that crane that put it up there was clearly negligent in the wrongdoing, and I file suit to seek direct compensation, say, okay, my medical bills are this much, my lost work is this much. The idea of that is one thing, but the idea of because a crane fell on me when I was little and caused this damage to my body, that I want every crane maker in the world shut down and cranes should never be used again, because those are two separate concepts of the actual person who has wronged and saying this person should be called to compensate for the damage they've caused to this person or to this individual or to this group, versus a broader sense, or punishing the people who actually didn't directly contribute to it, but because they're associated with X, Y, Z, based on their class, their nation, and in many cases, unfortunately, their ethnicity or skin color is a trend that I think leads down some very dangerous rabbit holes. And I think that you have something to say to that, Richard. Seems like you're jumping at the bit. No. Okay, I guess like some practical examples, and these might be some dicey subjects or something we talk about with students. We try to have a good, honest discussion. But for example, I think we can all agree that sexual assault in America and around the world is a serious issue. It is a real thing. It happens on our university campuses, again, where we're particularly familiar with. It is an issue. It happens, and it needs to be addressed. And many times it has not been properly addressed. And victims deserve justice. They deserve to have their voices heard, absolutely. That is a good thing. That is something that we've come a long ways in addressing. The danger of that is, and I've heard some people make this argument, the idea that when you look at the standards that, so the standard of guilt, the standard of the burden of proof essentially for universities to punish students for sexual assault allegations, in some cases was ridiculously low, especially when you look at it compared to the criminal burden of proof. It was more of the civil burden where it's like, well, we think this probably happened. Or the standard of conduct on becoming of a student is so broad. So even if they can't clearly define what happened, it's like, well, we don't like it, so we're going to do this. And I've heard people say essentially that, well, if some innocent students get kicked off a campus or have their lives ruined, it's a small price to pay for the greater good of making sure that voices are, and predominantly it's male to female, obviously. So predominantly that women's voices are heard. Not that it can't happen female to male, but this idea of it's okay if some innocent people have their lives ruined or get punished for the greater good. So that's one example where it's like, is that right that innocent people potentially, by having such a low burden of belief and sometimes out of political expediency because you want to appear as though you're being tough, that it's okay to have somebody innocent who actually has not committed any direct violation, to have them punished, to have their life forever altered in this idea of the greater good. And another example I have, and I'll turn it over to you, is in regards to, and this is something that Richard has a personal story as well, if you want to share, regards to child safety. Nobody wants their kids to be more safer more than me. But I'm also realistic and realize sometimes where we look for danger isn't exactly where danger is. Like the idea of stranger danger is way overblown. Not only 9% of all crimes against children actually happen by strangers, 91% are people we know. So rather than looking for strangers on the playground, we should be keeping a closer eye on our relatives or those we know. Anyway, but we were at a class one time it was called Darkness to Light, and it was eliminating, child sexual abuse. And, again, wonderful, wonderful thing we should all want to fight for. I don't think there's anybody who would disagree with that. But I did have the question I asked the people from the organization. I don't want to even say the organization because it's a wonderful group and they do a lot of great work, but I did ask them this question on two separate occasions. I said, I'm just curious, if we think that somebody is doing something to a child and we make a report and we call you guys up and we say, hey, I think this might be happening, and you go and investigate. I just said, what assurance, what steps do you have to take to make sure that things are done discreetly and that nobody's life is unknowingly or unwittingly ruined and put under a microscope for something they legitimately didn't do? Because we know the world we live in, you don't have to prove anything. All it takes is somebody saying, hey, CPS showed up at so-and-so's house, and your reputation could forever be damaged. And both times, and I don't think the ladies who run these classes are bad people. Again, they mean very well, but they never really answered the question to my satisfaction. They said, well, we're not a law enforcement agency. We don't file charges. All we do is go do an investigation and we leave it to the police. And it's just, it didn't really answer my question, my satisfaction.
Just to give more context, wasn't that also in relationship to people, like, we have a huge community need for people to adopt? Your question was related to them about what assurances also are there for people who are going and doing the hard work of adoption and making places for these people, that there's some safety that nobody can just willy-nilly just accuse them of things.
No, it wasn't specifically in relation to adoption. We kind of talk about that a little bit more.
That was the one that I remember you.
Oh, okay. No, that was a different story. But then, and I'll wrap up with this and get your thoughts. And then somebody who was a good friend, again, a good friend of mine, wonderful person. I don't think they meant anything by it. But they made the comment of saying, well, I'd rather, call on 10 innocent people if it turns out to be nothing, if it saves one child from being abused. And I get the sentiment of that I don't want to see one child suffer sexual abuse either. But that's a dangerous, slippery slope to say, well, I'm just going to throw 10 accusations out there and, cause 10 people to have to go through the pain and aggravation of this when in some cases maybe they legitimately did nothing wrong, in the odds that it might save one child. And I think that that's a dangerous, slippery slope to go down of using these wrongs in order to make a right. So I've said enough. I'll turn it over because I don't want to make this be a monologue. But I don't know if you guys have specific examples of that or what you think about the idea of using two wrongs to make a right.
Yeah. My family, again, social care work.
Yeah.
And me, I'm a mandatory abuse reporter, and I have to tell my friends that, and I think we have a very vague view on like what good and bad is everywhere. Like maybe just in America. I can't speak for the other countries, but I think that for one, we don't look at mental illness as something that should be looked at, because a lot of the times, I think that when a crime is done or something is done, it is due to a mental illness. Yeah. It's due to something not being turned over. It's due to a rock not being turned over and not being looked at. We tend to avoid situations and we tend to just throw people in jail or throw people under the bus because it's a lot easier than looking at the real issue.
It's attacking the symptom versus the disease itself.
Right. And so, at school, I had a friend who said that, I want to die. I had to report that. Like, that's something that at the time I thought that was my duty. It was my duty. But she wasn't helped at all. Like, she was just berated with questions, and there was no, hey, how do you feel? Are you okay? It was, how are you being treated at home? Who did this to you? There's always someone being like, who did this to you? And it's like, no one. It's like, I did this to myself. And it's hard to ask those questions because we don't want to ask ourselves that question either. We always want to put the blame on somebody else. Now, this isn't to say that you should blame yourself all the time. But I think that with our country and how we look at justice, it's very backwards. We'll put 10 people in jail for a child. We'll look at those 10 people and we'll be like, we won't even ask, are you okay?
Yeah. Keep going if you want to.
No,
I don't want to cut you off.
I think I got it. I'm just saying, like, what we're willing to do. Like, we're not even ready to address what we're willing to do. We haven't. It's been, like, I haven't seen a single case where that's just, like, that's solid, where that's just out in the open, where we actually figured out something and we did justice by it. I don't see stuff like that anymore, or ever.
Yeah. So I don't know if I have specific examples that I wanted to talk about, but I do want to just continue down the road of the concept of, I think every person, like, if you're listening to this, you have a decision to make about how you want things to be handled. And I think there is a time and a place for justice. Don't misunderstand. But I do wonder if the tit for tat, which I think if you are a student of history, you look at it, you're going to see cultures, people groups, tit for tat, tit for tat, tit for tat. And I'm convinced, I could be wrong, I am convinced, though, that the way in which you stop for the tit for tat, the way in which you get past the this wrong, because inevitably that person's going to feel like they were wronged, and then they're going to want to get back the person and it creates a cycle, is forgiveness. And I just want to come back to the point you made earlier about, forgiveness is viewed as weak. I understand that that's how people view it, but I don't actually believe that that's what it is. I think that forgiveness is one of the hardest, most powerful, most difficult things that a person can do, because it's like this: if you back into someone's fence but you're not driving your car, you're driving your friend's car, and then you backed into their fence, your neighbor's fence, and the neighbor comes out and says, well, who's going to pay for this? Well, is it the person who did it? Is it the person who owns the car? And so there's this question of, well, I want to know who I need to get. Whoever in that situation chooses to pay for the fence is owning the cost of it. So let's say the person who owns the car says, well, that person not only did that, but they also hurt my car, but I'm going to choose to pay for it. This is, by the way, this is a true story. The question comes down to who's going to pay for it. And I think that forgiveness is an act of paying for something. And I think it requires an immense amount of, and the interesting thing, and we don't have time to get into all of this, but if we look at the psychology behind some of these things, I think the way that you get people back into relationship with one another, where you get communities back into healing and trusting each other when there's distrust, is through the acts of forgiveness. It's through the acts of realizing, I don't know if I should, I should. There is there is a story of a Democratic governor of Alabama who fought to keep segregation in place.
George Wallace.
George Wallace. He fought to keep it in place.
R.I.P.
He fought the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
And at the end of his life, many of the civil rights leaders that he was working against were now his friends, because he eventually admitted he was wrong. He eventually said, I was wrong. And there's great articles that you should go look them up. I think they're some of the most illuminating articles about how powerful forgiveness is. Not that there's not a place and time for justice. That's not what I'm getting at. But forgiveness, I believe, is the best possible way forward. George Wallace was forgiven by these people. Now, they said things like, we'll never forget what you did. Like, you fought against us. You literally enacted things against us. But they were friends, and they were able to have meaningful conversation, and that they recognized that. And to me, that is illuminating, because here you have this guy who was a hardcore segregationist, a Democrat of Alabama who fought against the civil rights movement. And yet later he recognized his wrong and said, I was wrong. I was totally wrong. And they were able to come together and be in the same room. And if you don't value that, then this will mean nothing to you. But if that's the future you want, and this is why I say everyone who's listening to this, you have an obligation to come to the conclusion you want to come to. If that's the kind of future you want, I believe the only way to really get there is through the vehicle of forgiveness. Social forgiveness, personal forgiveness, and that the more we practice that as a society, I believe the more just and the more we will move towards being a united citizenship. That's not to do away with justice. I'm not saying you do away with it, but I think that's the power of it, that it can bring you to that place. And shoot me down if you're like...
No. I'm just thinking about what to say. Being on camera is very intimidating. Being in the studio, I could just be like, whatever. But, I have to think about what I'm really saying, and it's difficult. But in a way, what I'm getting at is that, justice is very important, but also forgiveness after the fact. But again, it takes me back to my kind of, my surrender versus forgiveness kind of ideal. It's like going back to compromise. I think it ties really well with that. You're going back to compromise. You're compromising a value or a thought that you have and saying that you were wrong. I want to know that thought process. Why did he think that he was wrong? Why? Because I'm very intrigued as to how someone completely changes their values and beliefs. And I hope that I'll get some information out of it. But, I'm thinking about compromise and forgiveness. It takes a lot of pride, or it takes a lack of pride to forgive someone. And when you compromise, you're compromising your pride. I think that has to do with each other. So I'm thinking maybe forgiveness is not the primer, but what's the opposite of primer? Maybe like the post. Maybe
like the de-escalation.
sure.
Is that-
Yeah.
Is that a
Yeah, that's a good.
I don't know if that's the right wording that you're going for.
Maybe.
Because like catalyst would be the thing that starts something. You said the opposite,
The opposite
right?
of that. Something that like kind of
The
soothes
diffuser.
soothes. Yeah, we go. This like.
Inhibitor.
Okay, there we go. Thank
go.
you.
He doesn't say much, but
There
when
we
he
go.
does,
The
powerful.
inhibitor.
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
inhibitor.
Yes.
And I think it's really hard for people to forgive, but
Yeah.
I think that it's easier when you give the idea that you can't forget. Like, there are things that people are like, I'm not going to forgive them because they don't believe that they can. How do I explain this? If the other people on the other side of this politician, they were like, oh, we'll forget it. They think that like forgiving is forgetting. That's not necessarily true. I think that we need to put in place an idea that if you forgive, you can't forget. That is something that you need to hold true because you're holding your values. You're not compromising in that aspect, but you're holding your beliefs. But you're also understanding that people can be wrong sometimes, or they can sometimes just be lying to themselves. And that's something that we all do. That's like mental health 101, that we lie to ourselves, and we have to be okay with that. We have to be okay with sometimes we screw up, and we're not as well as.
5-minute warning here.
Camera's gonna die soon.
Oh, well.
We might be done here in a second. You know what's interesting about forgiveness is it's not sexy, it's not cool, it's not revolutionary,
God,
it's not.
You don't rally the
Yeah,
truth
yeah,
by
you
saying,
like-
let's forgive everybody. You rally them by making them
It's
pissed off.
weird
and be
because
angry
like
and
everyone's
fearful and
like,
say we
wait,
have
you
to
just
go-
want me to like
Yeah.
forgive them, and it's this
counterintuitive.
powerful. And here's the thing, I do understand, because what people really want in forgiveness, and I think what sometimes is lacking is, we don't just mean, or I don't just mean like, oh, I just don't care what you did, or like
Yeah.
it's not a big deal. Like George Wallace was sorry. I was wrong.
Yeah.
And he wanted forgiveness, right? Like, I think that's what we want to see, because then we're like, it's easier to hand it out then. I don't want the idea to be like, oh, well, we just want to like, pass over it. It's not what we're talking about. But do we even value as a culture anymore? And I really actually don't think we do. I don't think we value as a culture.
It's weakness. Like we see it as
Right,
as
the
Well,
weakness.
and again, it's not flashy, if you rally people and say, these people are all against you and we have to seek justice, we have to seek retribution against them, it fires people up.
Right.
Again, you've seen Braveheart. Have you guys seen Braveheart?
Yeah.
Movie?
Yeah.
With Mel Gibson, the William Wallace Scottish Raider. I mean, the scene where he's riding on the horse, he's rallying up the troops, saying, we're going to go fight for our freedom, we're going to right this wrong, we're going to fight this injustice. Imagine if he's saying, we're going to ride out and forgive the English for everything they've done.
I don't think anybody would be.
Exactly. That doesn't win you
But
seats
you know
in the
what?
box office.
Go look up what South Africa
Yeah.
did after apartheid.
Well, Nelson Mandela.
Nelson Mandela did forgiveness. He tried to heal. Like, didn't work out perfectly because we have people involved. But it's hard because it's the like least cool option on the table, right? Where everyone's like, no, this is not cool. Like,
And
it doesn't rile anybody
Also,
up.
cancel culture, like, just butts head with
Forgiveness, like,
you can't possibly.
we're gonna ruin your life.
Right.
First of all, you never can.
Publish everything about you, tell you you're awful. Everyone should ignore you.
Exactly.
Right. I think also
Did a job again.
never ever, and
Can't
most
possibly make one mistake.
same with like whistleblowers.
Yeah.
It's like, I think it's just made it a little bit more apparent.
And
Cancel culture actually removes the ability for anybody to progress as a person.
exactly. It's like,
Yeah,
let's
yeah.
not allow them to chance
Okay, wait,
to
so
grow.
let me repeat that because people probably couldn't
yeah.
hear that. Daniel said, cancel culture removes the ability for anybody to ever progress in their life because they can never make a mistake and then come back from it.
I'm going to quote you on that if that's okay. What it is, the great
quotable.
result.
And that's dehumanizing people,
It is.
like thinking that none of us can make mistakes.
Well, in back, I know we're running low on time, but just I love your Nelson Mandela reference because what it's interesting is you look at those two examples because he took a ton of flack from the black Africans in South Africa who said, no, we want to punish the whites for what they did to us. We want to punish them for all these things. This is our chance. We got the hammer now. Let's swing it. And he had the balls to say, no, we're going to live peaceably. We are going to work together to build a better South Africa. And he took a lot of flack. And what's interesting is just to the north of South Africa is Zimbabwe. And what's lesser known is in 1981, so prior to Mandela coming to power, Robert Mugabe became the first black president of Zimbabwe, since the colonial era. And he took the opposite approach of, we are going to punish the white farmers, we're going to seize their land, this is our country now. And you just look at the quality of life in the two nations and, just the massive government corruption, human rights abuses you've seen in Zimbabwe versus South Africa, which is becoming one of the most stable, developed countries on the African continent. Not that they're, said without problems, every nation in the world is, but the idea, the path of forgiveness and bring people together.
Not the issue. It's that every person has a decision to make about which one of the ways we make the highest value.
Exactly.
I personally think if you take it's a tit for tat game, nobody wins because it's going to go on and on and on. And the wrongs sometimes only just get bigger and bigger and bigger until they can't be. And so the question comes, like, do we do we honor this idea of forgiveness, which I think is powerful and freeing for individuals. And I would get away from this idea of, like, that means weakness, that means you are forgetting, that means that there was nothing ever done wrong, there's nothing. Well, Nietzsche believed, just whoever has power is the one who's right.
Exactly.
Which, in a very practical way, he's kind of right, but but
in a closed universe.
It would just be so nice if we could have those conversations. You know what's interesting is I remember one time a long time ago, I think I posted that story of George Wallace, and nobody shared it, nobody retweeted. Like, I'm not on Twitter or whatever, and I don't do anything on social media anymore. But, like, nobody did anything with it because it was like, oh,
I can't touch that.
I don't know what to do with that. But it was like this beautiful example of how, like, people of varying backgrounds and disagreements could actually come together and unite. And I actually still believe that is wholly possible.
Absolutely.
I do. I believe it. I may be naive.
Well, you are naive, but for other reasons. We're over here, and we could talk about this for many hours. But I want to give Rosie the last word. Hopefully we haven't scared you away and you're willing to come join us at some point again.
Locked in my house for 6 months prior COVID because I'm an introvert. But yeah, that's just my life. Dude, no, I'm losing my mind. I haven't seen my friends in a year.
Tons of people I know who are introverts are like, no, I need people now.
This is awful. Do you think that, like, once this is all over, all the introverts will just
I hope so.
Why? I love introverts. I love how, like, they can just sit there and listen. They're very, like, mindful.
I don't know. I guess I wish we had time to discuss the new normal.
Again, it's just the
we'll
number
dive
of
into that next week.
blocks you have that you can handle. Sometimes introverts just have less Lego.
But they handle those
blocks
Legos.
God,
they
I'd love to
handle
talk to you about that. We had, like, a whole class. Can we please talk about that? Like, can we have a second show talking about? I'm ambivert. I hide when things get rough.
I smell a future topic. Okay. Well, unfortunately, the day is getting short. So, yes.
Ben, close us out. Close us out.
Yeah, close us.
Do you want a last word?
Any shout outs? Inspirational messages?
No. I mean, thank you guys for having me on and everything. If you want to tune in to KWOU in the summer, you're not gonna have any shows, but, like, it's. Oh, actually, we're doing a Wrong Place, Wrong Time tonight. So that's basically all of our DJs get into a Discord call and we all talk over each other, and then that's a show. And we're gonna post it tomorrow at 12 o'clock tomorrow. We're gonna have a little thing. But if you want to follow us on Twitter, I'm pretty sure you can just KWU at KWU online.
We'll send a link out when we put the YouTube video up here. And for those interested in the podcast, Oh Wise Oz, it will be dropping at 5 a.m. on Monday morning. Is that right? Got an East Coast time slot. We got to get it at 8 o'clock for the East Coast listeners that we have. Oh, it is? Okay. So if you're just dying, hit that alarm clock, wake up at 5 a.m. this Monday, and you'll... Daniel just said something really interesting you didn't hear, but I promise it was good. Yeah. Anyway.
Hey, if you learned anything from today, consider forgiveness. That's what I'd say. Consider it.
It works.
It's an option on the table. I think it's a valid option.
And it's awesome. All right. Hey, thank you all so much, wherever you may be. Pray that you're enjoying this day, and we look forward to seeing you again in 166 and a half short hours. So until then, enjoy the weekend, enjoy your summer, and just go forgive somebody today. All right. This is the Agora crew saying so